Over the English Channel, winter 1944 offered no mercy. At 24,000 feet, the cold was not an inconvenience, it was a weapon. Minus 40 degrees Celsius seeped through aluminum skins and into bones, fingers, lungs. Men did not feel the cold all at once, they felt it gradually, as numbness replaced sensation, as breath crystallized inside oxygen masks, as time itself seemed to slow. In those skies, war was no longer about flags or speeches, it was about numbers. How many aircraft took off, how many returned, how many men vanished between the two. The United States Army Air Forces called it strategic bombing. The men who flew the missions called it something else, suicide in daylight. Every flight over occupied Europe was a calculation written in advance. Statisticians already knew the odds. By late 1943, more than 30% of heavy bomber crews would not survive a full tour of 25 missions. Some groups lost half their men before rotations were complete. Entire crews disappeared between breakfast and dinner, leaving behind empty bunks and unopened letters. And yet, every morning, the bombers kept flying. Wave after wave of B-17 flying fortresses climbed into the sky, 4 engines humming, 13 machine guns bristling, armor cladding bolted wherever engineers believed it might help. The aircraft was designed to absorb punishment, to take damage and keep going, to live up to its name. But physics did not care about names. A direct flak burst did not respect engineering diagrams. A 20mm cannon shell did not pause for patriotism. And German fighter pilots did not miss opportunities. They hunted stragglers. A bomber alone was a dead bomber. That truth shaped everything. Formations stretched for miles, tight boxes of aircraft flying wingtip to wingtip, each plane protecting the others with overlapping fire. Doctrine demanded obedience. Stay in formation, follow the lead aircraft. If you fell behind, the formation continued without you. The mission mattered more than the airplane. The target mattered more than the crew. It was logical, it was efficient, and it was merciless. Inside those aircraft were not symbols or abstractions, but young men. Farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students who had traded calculus textbooks for bombing tables and engine gauges. Most were barely in their early 20s. They wore electrically heated suits that sometimes failed. They breathed through oxygen masks that sometimes froze. They watched neighboring aircraft disintegrate in mid-air, wings tearing away, fuselages erupting, and then climbed back into their own planes the next morning. The culture inside bomber groups was strange and fragile. Lucky jackets passed between crews, rituals repeated before every takeoff. Nose art painted pin-up girls, cartoon characters, men meant to bring humor into a place where laughter felt inappropriate. Superstition lived alongside engineering precision. But beneath it all was awareness. Everyone knew the empty bunks meant someone wasn't coming back. Everyone recognized the envelopes marked, "We regret to inform you." Briefings happened before dawn. Curtains were pulled back to reveal maps threaded with red yarn, stretching deep into Germany. Intelligence officers spoke calmly about targets and flak belts. The crews heard something else, life expectancy. This was the environment that shaped bomber pilots. And in this environment, most followed doctrine because doctrine was all that stood between them and chaos. Most pilots trusted the manual, most trusted formation, most trusted that abandoning a crippled aircraft was the safest choice. Most, but not all. Because war, like mathematics, has margins, and sometimes survival depends on seeing numbers others ignore. In Brooklyn years earlier, a boy had taken apart radios just to understand how they worked and then rebuilt them better than before. One day, that instinct would challenge everything the Air Force believed about what was possible in the sky. And when that moment came, 10 lives would depend not on bravery alone, but on calculation. Robert Rosenthal did not look like the kind of man history usually chooses. He wasn't loud. He wasn't reckless. He didn't cultivate fear or mystique. He grew up in Brooklyn during the Great Depression, in a household where survival depended less on heroics and more on precision. His father ran a small business. His mother held the family together through years when margins were thin and mistakes expensive. From an early age, Robert learned that problems were not solved by force, they were solved by understanding. He was good with numbers, good with systems, good with machines. As a teenager, he took radios apart not to break them, but to see why they worked. He studied components, traced connections, asked questions most people skipped. When he put them back together, they often worked better than before. That habit, disassemble, understand, rebuild, never left him. At Brooklyn College, he studied chemistry. He thought about law school. His future pointed toward stability, not violence. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and the equations changed. By 1943, Rosenthal was a first lieutenant learning to fly the heaviest bomber in the American arsenal. Flight school instructors noticed something immediately. Rosenthal followed procedures, but he didn't stop there. He wanted reasons. Why this altitude? Why this power setting? Why this trim configuration in turbulence, but not in clean air? Where other trainees memorized checklists, Rosenthal internalized relationships. He learned how weight affected climb rate, how fuel burn changed with altitude, how asymmetric thrust altered control responses. He treated the aircraft not as a set of rules, but as a dynamic system. Some instructors admired this. Others found it unsettling. Doctrine existed for a reason. Bombers were flown by crews, not individuals. Deviating from standard procedures introduced risk. Questioning manuals could be dangerous. But Rosenthal wasn't reckless. He was curious. When his crew formed up in the United States, it was 10 men bound by probability more than choice. Pilot, co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, engineer, radio operator, ball turret gunner, waist gunners, tail gunner. Each role specialized, each dependent on the others. Together, they would live inside an aluminum tube surrounded by explosives, fuel, and air cold enough to kill. They arrived in England in the autumn of 1943 and were assigned to the 100th Bomb Group at Thorpe Abbotts. The reputation of the group was already infamous. Other units called it the Bloody 100th. The nickname wasn't affectionate. The 100th had suffered catastrophic losses. Crews vanished with terrifying regularity. Aircraft returned shredded or not at all. Ground crews stopped asking who didn't make it back. They asked who did. Rosenthal flew his first mission in September, Stuttgart. The flak was heavy, the fighters aggressive, the sky unforgiving. His aircraft took hits, but it returned. That mission taught him things no briefing ever could. The sound of shrapnel tearing through aluminum wasn't sharp, it was violent, grinding, invasive. The smell of cordite mixed with hydraulic fluid stayed in the nose long after landing. Fear didn't arrive as panic, it arrived as weight, pressing into the chest, making every decision feel slower and heavier. And yet, the aircraft flew. Mission after mission followed. Bremen, Münster, Schweinfurt. Each flight added data, not theoretical data, lived data.
how the aircraft handled with uneven fuel loads, how much control authority remained after partial engine failure, how far structural integrity could be pushed before something truly broke. Rosenthal noticed details other pilots ignored. He paid attention to vibrations, to subtle changes in response, to how the aircraft felt when damaged but still controllable. Between missions there was waiting, English weather, mud, cold Quonset huts, card games played too long, letters written too carefully. Some men cracked, some requested transfers, some simply stopped functioning and were quietly sent home. Rosenthal did not crack. His crew noticed. They saw how thoroughly he prepared, how he reviewed not just procedures but contingencies, how his calm didn't disappear under fire, how he brought them back when other aircraft failed to return. Trust formed, not emotional trust, but functional trust, the kind that matters at altitude. By early 1944, Rosenthal had flown more than a dozen missions. He had seen formations ripped apart. He had heard radio calls from pilots who knew they were not coming home. He had watched aircraft spiral downward, trailing flame. And in those moments, something began to form in his mind. A thought he did not share, a conclusion he did not advertise. The doctrine said a crippled bomber was finished once it left formation. Rosenthal wasn't convinced. The math didn't support absolute failure. Engines could be lost. Altitude could be traded for range. Speed could replace maneuverability. If weight was reduced, if drag was managed precisely, if fuel was conserved precisely, a bomber might survive alone. Not always, not easily, but possibly. He kept the idea to himself. Commanders would reject it. Operations officers would cite regulations. Other pilots would call it insanity. So Rosenthal did what he always did. He waited, he observed, he calculated. He built a private theory grounded not in hope, but in numbers. A theory that would soon be tested, not in simulation, but in the most unforgiving classroom imaginable, the sky over Germany. The mission briefing on February 25, 1944 changed the tone in the room. Experienced crews went quiet the moment the curtain was pulled back. The red yarn on the map stretched far deeper than usual, past familiar targets, past the margin of comfort, into southern Germany. The objective was Regensburg, home to a critical Messerschmitt factory producing Bf-109 fighters. Destroy the plant, and you reduce the Luftwaffe's ability to contest the skies. On paper, the logic was flawless. In reality, it was a trap. Regensburg lay more than 600 miles from England. For much of the route, the bombers would fly beyond effective fighter escort. The Germans knew its value. They defended it accordingly. Heavy flak belts, alert interceptor bases, predictable approach corridors. The weather made it worse. Low clouds hung over England. Visibility at altitude was unreliable. Formation assembly would be slow, inefficient, and costly in fuel, but command approved the mission anyway. Maximum effort. Every available bomber. Before dawn, Rosenthal and his crew walked across the frozen airfield toward their B-17. Frost coated the wings. The aircraft looked asleep, silent and heavy, as if aware of what lay ahead. The ground crew had completed their checks. Rosenthal performed his own walk-around anyway. It wasn't superstition, it was familiarity. You didn't trust a machine with 10 lives unless you knew it intimately. Engines coughed to life, sending blue smoke into the dark. One by one, dozens of bombers woke across the field. The sound was not inspiring, it was overwhelming. Thunder without rhythm, fuel, oil, vibration, noise. Takeoff was routine, Assembly was not. Bombers circled endlessly through cloud layers, burning fuel while searching for their assigned positions. Engines strained. Formation discipline began even before the enemy appeared. By the time they crossed the channel, they were already behind schedule. Altitude, 24,000 feet. Temperature, far below zero. Ahead, occupied Europe. The first fighters appeared over Holland, Focke-Wulf 190s. They attacked head-on, closing at combined speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. The B-17's guns hammered, tracers filled the sky, casings rattled through the fuselage. Rosenthal held formation. That was doctrine. That was survival. But bombers were already falling. To the left, one aircraft lost a wing and disintegrated without a single parachute visible. Another trailed fire from its number 3 engine and dropped away. The formation closed ranks and continued. Then the flak began. Black bursts bloomed at altitude, expanding spheres of metal traveling faster than sound. Pilots could not evade. Formation flying required straight and level flight. The bombers flew through the flak because the target demanded it. The bomb run was the most dangerous phase. Long minutes of unwavering course while the bombardier took control. The aircraft belonged to the Norden bomb site now. Pilots maintained heading, while gunners below adjusted their aim precisely because they knew the bombers could not maneuver. Bombs away. 4,000 pounds of explosives dropped free. The aircraft lurched upward, suddenly lighter. The formation began its turn away. And then Rosenthal's aircraft was hit. The flak burst rocked the bomber sideways. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage. Alarms screamed. The number 2 engine trailed smoke. Oil pressure collapsed. Rosenthal feathered the propeller and shut it down. 3 engines. The formation was already pulling away. Standard procedure was clear. They could not slow. He increased power on the remaining engines, trying to hold position. Fuel consumption spiked. He did the math instantly. Range versus fuel, speed versus altitude. The numbers were unforgiving. Then the number 4 engine began to overheat. Cylinder head temperatures climbed into the red. The engineer reported possible coolant loss. Rosenthal knew what that meant. Minutes, maybe less. He made the call. Prepare to bail out. It was the safe option. 10 parachutes, 10 chances over German territory. Prisoner of war was better than death. The co-pilot agreed. The navigator agreed. They were alone now. 2 failing engines, no escort, no formation. Every German fighter in the sector would see them. Rosenthal looked at the instruments, looked at the map, looked at the 2 engines still producing thrust, and made a different calculation. 2 engines were enough, not to climb, not to fight, but to fly. If weight was reduced, if altitude was traded for efficiency, if every gallon of fuel was treated as irreplaceable. "We're not bailing out," he said. Silence followed. Then, calmly, "We're going home together." This was not bravado. It was math. The aircraft still responded. The structure held. The hydraulics functioned. The controls answered. Rosenthal dropped out of formation altitude, descending to 15,000 feet. Lower altitude reduced engine strain and improved efficiency, but brought them within range of light flak. He accepted that risk. Speed over altitude, a moving target instead of a predictable one. The crippled bomber turned north, alone against the sky. Doctrine said this was impossible. Doctrine had no margin for what came next.
The moment Rosenthal committed to flying home alone, the mission changed its nature. This was no longer about bombing accuracy, strategic impact, or formation discipline. It became something narrower and far more unforgiving. energy management, fuel conservation, time. At 15,000 feet, the B-17 behaved differently. The air was thicker. Control response improved, but drag increased. Every adjustment now had consequences measured not in theory, but in minutes of survival. Rosenthal flew manually, no autopilot. He wanted to feel the aircraft, the subtle yaw from asymmetric thrust, the vibrations traveling through the control column, the way the bomber resisted or accepted corrections. His hands and feet made constant micro-adjustments, compensating for what the missing engines could no longer provide. Inside the fuselage, the crew shifted from shock to function. The engineer monitored temperatures obsessively. The navigator recalculated headings every few minutes. The radio operator listened for any intelligence on enemy fighter activity. The gunners scanned the sky without pause. Nobody spoke unnecessarily. Trust had replaced discussion. West of Munich, two Bf-109s spotted them. A lone bomber, low altitude, damaged, an easy kill. The fighters approached from the rear quarter. The tail gunner fired first, then the waist gunners. Tracers cut arcs through the gray sky. Rosenthal did not maneuver aggressively. He couldn't. The aircraft was too fragile. Instead, he made small, deliberate changes, enough to disrupt the fighter's aim, enough to give his gunners better angles, never enough to bleed speed. The fighters made one pass, then another. Then they broke off, perhaps low on ammunition, perhaps surprised that a crippled bomber still fought back with coordination. Whatever the reason, the sky ahead cleared. Over France, the weather closed in. Cloud layers thickened, visibility collapsed. It was both blessing and curse. Clouds hid them from fighters. Clouds erased visual navigation. Dead reckoning replaced landmarks. The navigator worked from estimates and drift corrections. Rosenthal leaned the mixture on the remaining engines, stretching fuel molecule by molecule. The gauges crept downward. The co-pilot suggested landing in France, any field, any strip. The navigator mentioned Switzerland, neutral territory, internment but survival. Rosenthal acknowledged the options, then continued toward England. This wasn't stubbornness. The math still worked. The channel appeared ahead, gray water beneath gray sky. The white cliffs of Dover was somewhere in the haze. Rosenthal began a shallow descent, conserving fuel for the final leg. Then the third engine sputtered. Fuel pressure dropped. The gauge read empty. The engine coughed once, twice, then died. Rosenthal feathered the propeller instantly. One engine left. One. Physics took control. One engine could not maintain altitude at the bomber's weight. The descent began whether he wanted it or not. 200 feet per minute, then 300. Rosenthal adjusted trim, balanced throttle and airspeed. He could not allow a stall. He could not allow excessive speed. Every margin was razor thin. The co-pilot radioed ahead. Emergency, 2 engines out, fuel critical, priority landing. The tower cleared the pattern. Emergency vehicles rolled into position, but Thorpe Abbotts was still 20 miles away. The remaining engine ran hot. Oil pressure was marginal. The engineer watched it like a man watching a dying friend. No one spoke. There was nothing left to say. 5 miles out, altitude 600 feet. They appeared through the murk. The runway. Too low. Too slow. Rosenthal lowered the landing gear. The hydraulics groaned, protesting the demand. The wheels locked down. Green lights. Drag increased. Descent rate worsened. He compensated with throttle. The engine responded weakly. 1 mile. 200 feet. The stall warning chirped. The aircraft flew on the edge of aerodynamic collapse, balanced between lift and gravity. Rosenthal ignored instinct and trusted experience. His movements were minimal, precise, controlled. The fence at the end of the runway passed beneath them. He pulled the throttle to idle. The engine wound down.
The B-17 dropped the final 20 feet. Impact. Hard. Tires screamed. Shock absorbers compressed violently. Metal groaned, but held. Rosenthal let the aircraft slow naturally. Braking too hard would shred the tires. Speed bled away. 50 miles per hour. 40. 30. He turned off the active runway. Only then did he shut down the last engine. Silence followed. Not celebration, not relief, just silence. For the first time in hours, the aircraft was no longer trying to kill them.
The landing at Thorpe Abbotts should have been an exception. That was how the Air Force saw it at first, a rare alignment of luck, timing, and circumstances. A crippled bomber limping home on one engine was not something doctrine could explain, so doctrine labeled it an anomaly. Rosenthal did not. 2 hours after shutdown, he sat in the debriefing room surrounded by intelligence officers and operations staff. The questions began routinely: flak concentrations, fighter encounters, bomb damage assessment. He answered with precision, without embellishment. Then the focus shifted. Why didn't you order bailout? Why continue alone? Why risk the aircraft? The tone was not admiration, it was skepticism. Rosenthal did not argue emotionally. He didn't appeal to bravery or leadership. He reached for numbers. Fuel burn at reduced altitude, thrust available from 2 engines, then 1. Weight reduction after bombs and ammunition were expended. Structural limits versus control authority. He explained the flight home as if it were a problem set: variables, constraints, outcomes. The room listened more closely than they intended to. Some pilots present were already imagining their own aircraft damaged, falling behind formation, faced with the same decision. The operations officer concluded the discussion carefully. No approval, no condemnation, just silence. Officially, nothing changed. Unofficially, everything did. Within weeks, Rosenthal's aircraft was damaged again, then again. An engine failure over Brunswick, hydraulic loss near Kassel, severe flak damage over Frankfurt so extensive that the group commander assumed the crew was lost. Each time, Rosenthal brought the aircraft home, not intact, not clean, but flyable. Patterns emerged. He stayed with the aircraft longer than other pilots dared. He accepted lower altitudes when doctrine favored height. He traded formation protection for fuel efficiency when separation was unavoidable. He trimmed damaged control surfaces, compensated with asymmetric thrust, and flew aircraft that engineering officers later described as beyond reasonable limits. The key was not defiance, it was understanding. Rosenthal knew exactly how far those limits extended because he had studied them before ever needing them. On a mission to Posen, his B-17 lost 2 engines and half its rudder. Standard response dictated bailout over friendly territory. Rosenthal calculated another solution. He trimmed aggressively, used remaining engines unevenly, and maintained directional control through thrust rather than control surfaces. The aircraft crossed 300 miles of hostile airspace at 4,000 feet and landed in England intact. Word spread, not as legend, as instruction. Crews began requesting assignment to his aircraft. Pilots wanted to observe his methods. Gunners trusted the survival rate. Engineers studied the damage patterns of planes he returned. Rosenthal did not teach formally. He did not give speeches. He answered questions quietly, technically, always framing decisions as calculations rather than choices. By May of 1944, he completed his first tour of 25 missions. Rotation orders were waiting. Most men left combat without hesitation. Survival odds dropped sharply after 25 missions. The statistics were clear. 50 missions were nearly impossible. Rosenthal volunteered to stay. He understood the math better than anyone. He stayed anyway. The Air Force began paying attention, not officially, not in manuals or doctrine, but in practice. Operations officers interviewed his crew. Engineers reviewed his flight data.
Informal briefings circulated among pilots. Understand your aircraft, know your margins, calculate before reacting. The effect was subtle but measurable. Fewer premature bailouts, more emergency landings attempted, more crews returning intact. Casualty rates in the 8th Air Force declined slightly in late 1944, not enough to change the nature of the war, but enough to save lives at the margins. Rosenthal never claimed credit. When asked, he spoke only of mechanics and mathematics. He rejected the word hero. He insisted others were just as brave. His crew knew better. They understood the difference between courage that follows procedure and courage that knows when procedure no longer applies. They understood that every successful landing represented a conscious refusal to accept the standard answer. And as those landings accumulated, something irreversible happened. What had once been dismissed as impossible became something pilots attempted, and what pilots attempt, carefully, intelligently, eventually becomes normal.
By the summer of 1944, Robert Rosenthal was no longer an outlier. He was a variable the system could not ignore. He had flown beyond 50 combat missions, a number so statistically improbable that most officers avoided discussing it. In the 8th Air Force, survival curves were brutal and unforgiving. Every additional mission pushed a crew deeper into territory where probability stopped being a guide and became a warning. Most men understood that math intuitively. Rosenthal understood it precisely. That understanding did not make him reckless, it made him deliberate. As a squadron commander, he now carried responsibility not just for his own crew, but for others watching him closely. Pilots studied how he planned missions, how he spoke during briefings, how he framed risk. He did not tell them to break doctrine. He showed them how to think when doctrine no longer fit reality. His method was never dramatic, it was systematic. He believed that most losses did not occur because aircraft were instantly unflyable, but because pilots reached a psychological breaking point before the machine reached a physical one. Panic, not damage, often ended flights. Fear compressed decision-making until only the manual remained, and when the manual said bailout, bailout became inevitable. Rosenthal approached the aircraft differently. To him, the B-17 was not a fragile object barely held together by luck. It was a system with margins, margins that could be expanded or contracted depending on understanding. Engine performance curves mattered. Structural load limits mattered. Airspeed, altitude, temperature, fuel flow, all variables that interacted continuously. He taught pilots to see damage not as a verdict, but as a new equation. An engine failure was not the end of thrust. Loss of altitude was not loss of control. Separation from formation was not immediate death. Each situation demanded recalculation, not surrender. This philosophy did not make missions safer in the absolute sense. Bombers still exploded. Crews still died. The sky over Germany remained lethal. But at the margins, where outcomes were decided, behavior changed. Pilots stayed with their aircraft longer. They attempted controlled descents instead of immediate bailouts. They prioritized airspeed and stability over aggressive maneuvering. Engineers adjusted training. Crews practiced emergency scenarios with greater realism. Institutional knowledge expanded quietly, without fanfare. The Air Force did not rewrite doctrine, but doctrine began to flex. Rosenthal's own missions continued to test limits. Over Augsburg, his bomber returned riddled with flak, control cables partially severed, hydraulics barely functioning. Over Berlin, fighters damaged multiple engines, forcing him to land with asymmetrical thrust that would have terrified less experienced pilots.
Each time, the pattern repeated. Calculate, adjust, fly the machine, not the fear. Those who flew with him described his presence in the cockpit as stabilizing, not because he projected confidence, but because his decisions made sense. Even when afraid, and he was afraid, logic retained priority. That distinction mattered. Fear was acknowledged, not denied. It existed alongside calculation, not instead of it. As summer turned toward autumn, the cumulative effect became visible. His squadron's survival rate improved measurably. Not dramatically. War does not allow miracles, but enough to be noticed. Rosenthal became a reference point. Not a legend told in mess halls, but a practical example cited in quiet conversations. A pilot others trusted not because he promised survival, but because he refused to surrender agency. When the war in Europe ended, Rosenthal returned to the United States with little fanfare. He carried medals, including the Distinguished Service Cross, but they did not define him. He returned to law school, built a civilian career, raised a family. He rarely spoke about combat. When asked, he deflected attention away from himself. He insisted the real heroes were buried overseas, that he had only done his job. But his crews remembered differently. They remembered moments when the manual said there were no options left, and he calmly created one. They remembered landings that felt impossible until the wheels touched ground. They remembered trusting calculations more than hope. And decades later, when aviation training evolved, his influence remained. Modern pilots train for engine-out scenarios using principles Rosenthal applied empirically. Scenario-based decision-making, weighing variables instead of following rigid scripts, became standard. Military and civilian aviation acknowledged what combat had already proven, that textbooks are necessary, but reality is messier. Rosenthal's legacy was not a tactic or a maneuver, it was a mindset. That competence expands possibility, that intelligence under pressure saves lives, that courage does not shout, it calculates. And in a war defined by overwhelming loss, bending the survival curve even slightly meant thousands of men lived who otherwise would not have.
Among the many stories that surrounded Robert Rosenthal by the end of the war, one sequence of missions became quietly symbolic of everything he represented. They were later referred to simply as the 7 Bridges. In April 1944, the 8th Air Force launched a series of raids against German transportation infrastructure. Bridges were not glamorous targets. They did not explode into towering fireballs like factories or refineries, but they mattered. They carried troops, fuel, ammunition, the arteries of a nation already under strain. Rosenthal's group was tasked with attacking 7 major bridge complexes over the course of 10 days. Each mission followed a familiar pattern: long flights, heavy flak, aggressive fighters, marginal weather, and repeatedly severe damage. Rosenthal's aircraft took hits on every one of those missions. Shrapnel punched through wings and fuselage, engines failed, control surfaces were damaged, fuel leaked, hydraulics bled away. Any single one of those conditions would normally justify abandoning the aircraft. Instead, each mission ended the same way. The full crew returned to base. The ground crews began keeping an unofficial count. By the end of the sequence, Rosenthal's primary B-17 had accumulated more than 900 flak and bullet holes. It spent more time under repair than in operational readiness. Mechanics patched aluminum, replaced control cables, swapped engines, sealed fuel tanks, and sent it back into the sky again. The aircraft became a paradox. By any reasonable standard, it should have been written off. By Rosenthal's standard, it was still flyable. These missions did not make headlines, they were not decisive battles, but they reinforced a truth that was spreading quietly through bomber units. Survival was not random, it was influenced, sometimes decisively, by how pilots interpreted damage. Rosenthal's reputation by now was firmly established, but he resisted myth-making. He discouraged exaggeration. When pilots asked how he kept bringing crews home, his answers were always unsatisfying to those looking for drama. He talked about balance, about thrust, about airspeed, about knowing exactly when an aircraft was finished and when it wasn't. He rejected the idea that he was pushing luck. Luck, he argued, was what you relied on when you didn't understand the system. By war's end, Rosenthal had flown 52 combat missions. The number alone placed him in rare territory, but what mattered more was the consistency. He did not survive by avoiding danger. He flew deep into Germany repeatedly. He absorbed damage repeatedly, and he responded the same way each time. Calculate, adapt, fly. After the war, Rosenthal faded from public attention almost immediately. He returned to civilian life without fanfare. Law school, a legal career, a family, a quiet existence built on the same discipline that had kept him alive at altitude. When interviewed years later, he rarely spoke about himself. He redirected praise toward men who never returned, toward crews whose calculations failed because circumstances left no margin. Yet at reunions of the 100th Bomb Group, survivors sought him out. Old men now, they remembered being young, cold, frightened, and trusting a pilot who refused to give up when giving up was the expected outcome. They described him the same words again and again: unflappable, brilliant, stubborn, not fearless, afraid, but governed. One former crew member explained it simply: Rosenthal was afraid like everyone else. The difference was that fear never overruled the math. When calculations said survival was possible, he believed the numbers more than the fear. That belief changed behavior, and behavior changes outcomes. By the time the war ended, the B-17 itself had become legendary. More than 38,000 produced, thousands lost, millions of flight hours logged. But the aircraft was never the point. The stories that endured were about people, about decisions when manuals stopped being useful, about competence under pressure, about the refusal to surrender to probability. Rosenthal did not invent a new machine. He did not rewrite doctrine. He demonstrated something subtler and more powerful: that understanding your machine completely expands what you believe is possible. And once something is proven possible, it becomes precedent.
Before closing this story, one clarification matters. There are no surviving cockpit transcripts from Robert Rosenthal's missions. No recordings captured his exact words in moments of crisis. No crew logs preserve dialogue spoken under fire. When this story describes decisions, reactions, or moments of silence inside the aircraft, they are not invented, but they are reconstructed. They are drawn from after-action reports, debriefings, crew testimony, engineering records, and the consistent accounts of the men who flew with him. What is presented here is not fiction, but informed narrative, shaped by documented behavior and corroborated history. With that said, the record itself is unambiguous. Robert Rosenthal flew 52 combat missions in B-17 bombers over the most heavily defended airspace of World War II. He repeatedly returned aircraft that should not have returned. He did so not through recklessness, but through disciplined calculation. His aircraft accumulated hundreds of flak and bullet holes. Engines failed, control systems degraded, fuel ran out, and yet, time after time, 10 men walked away alive. When the war ended, Rosenthal did not seek recognition. His obituary would later mention his Distinguished Service Cross, his legal career, his family. What it could never fully capture was the number of lives that continued because he refused to accept the standard answer when alternatives still existed.
At reunions of the 100th Bomb Group, surviving crew members spoke quietly among themselves. They remembered moments when probability said survival was unlikely. They remembered trusting a young pilot to weigh fuel against distance, thrust against drag, fear against logic. They remembered how close the margins were and how deliberately those margins were managed. Rosenthal never framed his actions as heroism. He spoke in the language of engineering and mathematics, weight and balance, fuel flow, performance curves, structural limits. But beneath that technical language was something profoundly human, the refusal to surrender decision-making to panic. The bomber offensive over Europe cost the 8th Air Force more than 26,000 dead, more than the entire United States Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. Bomber crews faced casualty rates higher than almost any other role in the war. These men understood the odds. They flew anyway. Rosenthal's story matters not because he was uniquely brave, thousands were. It matters because he demonstrated courage guided by understanding changes outcomes, that logic under pressure is not cold, it is humane, it is how people come home. Modern aviation training carries this lesson forward. Pilots today train for engine-out scenarios, degraded systems, and impossible-seeming situations using principles born in those bombers over Germany. Scenario-based decision-making, flexible response, and understanding margins all descend from hard-earned wartime experience. The B-17s themselves are mostly gone now. A few survive in museums, polished and pristine, far removed from the battered aircraft that returned with smoke trailing and hydraulics failing. But the principle remains alive in every cockpit where a pilot faces crisis and chooses calculation over panic. Rosenthal proved that the line between possible and impossible is often thinner than doctrine admits, that manuals are essential but not infallible, that sometimes the best decision is the one no checklist provides. 7 bridges, 52 missions, 10 men brought home every time. Those numbers are precise because the man behind them thought in numbers: fuel, weight, thrust, time, variables in an equation where the desired solution was always survival. If this story helped you see history differently, if it reminded you that heroism often looks like competence rather than spectacle, then take a moment to support the channel. Like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know which untold stories you want to hear next, because history isn't just about what was destroyed, it's about the lives that made it back. And those lives deserve to be remembered.